A straight man's gay relationship behind bars. To survive or to curb loneliness. Today is the day you die, Mark. The loud voice of an inmate roared behind me as spittle from the speaker's mouth splattered on the base of my neck. But he wasn't the only one calling for my blood on this fine afternoon. What's the matter, Marky? Cat got your tongue? Another inmate, Rudolph, jeered as he scowled at me. I paid them no mind as I stared down their leader, Ify. You might be wondering what I could have possibly done to piss off the most dangerous man in the penitentiary alongside his crew. Well, I had lied and betrayed his trust, all for my own selfish gain. Personally, I felt it was a little hypocritical coming from them, seeing as they were all criminals and must have lied or manipulated at some point in their notorious careers. But the topic was not up for debate. Despite the mounting tension and the lack of guards to break it all up, I wasn't too worried for my safety. I was too busy getting my heart broken by the empty look in Ify's eyes. Sure, it might have started off as a ruse to ensure my safety, but I had fallen for Ify McNeil, and I couldn't stand the thought of serving out my sentence in this hellhole without him. I took a shaky step forward, and Ify didn't flinch. Ify and I were very close now. Our noses were a hair's breadth from each other. All it would take would be a gentle shove from any of his chanting goons for both of our lips to make contact. But I didn't need a shove. Quicker than anyone in the raging crowd could react, I gently placed my hands on both sides of his face and kissed him tenderly, just like he would kiss me on the nights we spent together. I love you, Ify. 6 months ago. Nothing could have prepared me for prison. I worked at one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the country before shit hit the fan. It was a regular Thursday evening when the cops burst in through the doors. I was accused of embezzling millions, a crime I had no part in. The evidence was stacked against me, and despite my protests and very expensive lawyers, I was sentenced to 4 years behind bars. The first few weeks were the hardest. I kept to myself, trying to navigate the unspoken rules of prison life. But it wasn't long before I caught the attention of the wrong crowd. Beatings became a part of my daily routine, each one leaving me more broken than the last. That's when Rudy, not Rudolph, my cellmate, suggested the unthinkable. Listen to me, Mark. You're not going to last if you keep this up, he had whispered to me. Leave me alone, Rudy. You seem pretty content to let O'Neill's goons kick the crap out of me. What the hell did you expect me to do, jump in to defend you? That would have made me a target too. That wouldn't help anybody. Not you and definitely not me. Rudy threw his stocky arms in the air hysterically. I understood Rudy's point. Heroics and chivalry had no place here. Best case scenario, you'd end up stabbed. Worst case scenario, you'd end up being somebody's personal shuttle for the remainder of your sentence. Listen, Mark, you need friends, powerful ones. Rudy brought his voice down to a loud whisper. What are you talking about, powerful friends? I asked, frustration bleeding into my voice. I observed as he walked towards the bars of our cell to stealthily confirm that no one was listening in on us before speaking again. You need to join up with one of the gangs. That's the only way you'll stop getting kicked around. I tried to answer that I wasn't a criminal, but he didn't seem interested. His eyes were serious, the kind of serious that made you listen whether you wanted to or not. It's about survival, and right now you're not surviving, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, the pain from the beatings throbbing in time with my heartbeat. And what, pretend to be something I'm not? Lie through my teeth just to get a semblance of peace? I asked, the bitterness evident in my tone. No, not lie, Rudy corrected me. Adapt. Everyone in here is playing a role. Do you think you're the only innocent person in here? All I'm saying is that the important players know that you were arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and insider trading. You don't need to have a rap sheet to fit in. You just need to be smart about it. You need to play to your strengths. Alright, I finally conceded. I'll do it, but how? I can't just walk up to them and say, hey, I'm Mark, let's be friends." Rudy chuckled. "Leave that to me. I've been here long enough to know how to pull some strings. Just be ready when I give you the signal." And with that, Rudy lay back on his bunk, a sly smile playing on his lips. 2 weeks later, the group Rudy introduced me to was known as the Wall Street Bandits, a collection of white-collar criminals who had been caught for stock fraud and financial crimes. They were led by a man named Pedro, a former hedge fund manager. At first, it seemed like a perfect fit. I was Mark Hanson, after all, a former accountant from the prestigious firm. The initial meeting went smoothly, and I could see the respect in their eyes as I spoke their language of numbers and margins. But respect turned to resentment when they discovered where I had worked. My firm was the very firm that had exposed their fraudulent schemes, leading to their downfall and subsequent incarceration. "You're one of them?" Pedro accused, his voice laced with venom. "You think you can waltz in here and be one of us after what your firm did?" My words fell on deaf ears. They saw me not as a symbol of the firm that had ruined their lives. The beating that followed was brutal and unrelenting. When I awoke, I was in the infirmary, the steady beep of the heart monitor the only indication that I was still alive. "I'm sorry, Mark," Rudy whispered. "I didn't know you guys had history." I wanted to be angry, to blame him for my current state, but I couldn't. Rudy had only been trying to help. No, the blame lay squarely on my shoulders. It was my life choices that had led me here to this bed in this prison. As I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, I made a vow. I would take control of my fate. 1 month later, the warden had made it clear that he expected me to resume my duties immediately. As I shuffled back into my cell, my thoughts were interrupted by Rudy's hushed urgency. "Mark, we need to talk," Rudy whispered. "What is it?" I asked, the unease settling in his gut like a bad meal, because the last time we had to talk, I ended up hospitalized for over a month. "It's Ify," Rudy said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "Rumor has it that he's been keeping tabs on you." I immediately felt a chill run down my spine at the mention of the name. Ify, the white-haired Irish devil with eyes like chips of frozen sky, was a legend in these parts. The government had hoped to leverage his insider knowledge by keeping him locked up, but 7 years had passed, and Ify's lips remained sealed. "That's nothing but gossip. Stupid gossip." I tried to dismiss Rudy's claims, but my voice betrayed the tremor of fear that Ify's interest in me had sparked. "Listen, Mark, this could be your chance." I scoffed in disbelief, the memory of my recent beating still overly fresh. "Survival? By cozying up to that man? You've got to be joking." "I'm not joking, Mark. Ify isn't like the others. He's taken an interest in you, a good kind of interest. Why do you think those Wall Street goons didn't come back to finish the job?" My skepticism must have shown because Rudy squeezed my arm tighter. "Trust me, Ify's protection is worth it. He can keep you safe from the likes of those who put you in the infirmary." The idea was ludicrous, dangerous, and yet there was a sliver of hope in Rudy's words. I finally conceded, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'll do it. I'll try to get close to him." Rudy nodded. "Good. I'll set things up. Just be ready when the time comes." 1 week later. Rudy's connections worked faster than I anticipated. Within a week, he had Ify's schedule in his hands, and 2 days later, he managed to bribe the guards into assigning me to library duty with the man himself. I was nervous to say the least. The morning of my first shift, I walked into the library, my heart lodged firmly in my throat. Ify was nothing like I had imagined. Devilishly handsome, with a build that spoke of restrained power rather than brute force. His Nordic tattoos were a stark contrast to the softness in his green eyes, and his cropped hair gave him an air of friendliness that surprised me. He was reading, utterly absorbed in a world of fiction. "Ify?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up and there was a flicker of something. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity in his gaze. Mark, right? I stood there, my hands clammy. As he looked at me, there was no thunder in his eyes, no lightning in his stance, just a quiet curiosity that seemed out of place on his rugged features. Scared? He asked, his voice a gentle tease. I swallowed hard. Wouldn't you be? I managed to ask. Ify chuckled. I suppose I would be if our roles were reversed. He closed the book with a soft thud, his gaze never leaving mine. But you're safe here, Mark. With me, you're always safe. It was absurd. The most feared man in the prison offering safety like it was a gift he could wrap and hand over. Yet, as we talked, the tension I carried began to unravel, thread by thread. Ify spoke of books with a passion that was infectious, his knowledge vast and his opinion strong, yet open for debate. I approached the table where Ify sat, my eyes scanning the spines of books that lay scattered around to get a feel of what Ify was into. You've got quite the collection here, I said, trying to sound casual. Ify looked up from his book, a faint smile playing on his lips. A man's got to have something to keep his mind off the chains, doesn't he? His voice was low, almost a purr, and it sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. True, I replied, picking up a worn copy of The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald has a way of making you forget the bars, doesn't he? Ah, Fitzgerald, Ify mused, his green eyes glinting. You can almost taste the champagne and despair, he paused, his gaze lingering on me. But I find myself more drawn to Hemingway. There's a truth in his simplicity, don't you think? I nodded, drawn into the conversation despite myself. Life here, it's unfiltered. Ify's chuckle was soft, almost intimate. You have a way with words, Mark. It's refreshing. He leaned back in his chair, his tattooed arms resting on the table. Tell me, what's your escape? When the lights go out and the cell feels too small, where does your mind wander? To dystopian worlds, mostly, I confessed. Orwell, Huxley, Bradbury. There's something about their bleak features that feels almost hopeful. Ify hummed, his eyes never leaving mine. Hope and hopelessness. I like that. He stood up, closing the distance between us. You know, Mark, in another life, I think we could have been friends. My breath hitched as Ify's hand brushed against mine, a touch lighter than air but laden with intent. Maybe in this life, too, I whispered, daring to hold Ify's gaze a tad longer than necessary. I was here for a reason after all. Ify's smile was slow, deliberate. Maybe, he agreed, his thumb grazing the back of my hand. But for now, let's just be friends. A smile threatened to break out on his lips, and then we started laughing. We eventually had to begin cleaning. Ify and I went our separate ways as we divided the library into two equal halves, and in less than an hour we had finished and our shifts had come to an end. Time sure flies when you're having fun, eh? Ify walked up to me and extended his hand. I took it, expecting a firm shake, but instead, he turned my hand over and pressed his lips to the back of my palm. I could only stare at him in shock. He smiled a small, "Until next time, Mark." I watched him walk away. What game was Ify playing? And more importantly, what were the rules? I trudged back to my cell. The door clanged shut behind me, and Rudy's face lit up, like a kid on Christmas morning. So, how'd it go? He asked, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. I sighed, sinking onto the edge of my bunk. It was not what I expected, I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. Ify, he's not the monster everyone makes him out to be. Rudy's eyes sparkled with barely concealed curiosity. Yeah? When are you seeing him again? I hesitated. I don't think I will be, I said quietly. What? Why not? Rudy's voice was a mix of confusion and disappointment. I looked away, feeling a flush creep up my neck. I think I might have given him the wrong impression. He might be... interested in me romantically. Rudy's mouth felt open. And? What's the problem? I met his gaze. I'm straight, Rudy. No matter how charming Ify is, I can't return those feelings. Rudy's face fell and he sat down heavily. But think about it, Mark. Ify's influence could make life here a breeze for you. I shook my head. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to use someone's feelings to my advantage. I won't see him again. That's it. Rudy looked like I'd just canceled that Christmas he was so excited about. I needed rest. I climbed into bed, the sheets cold and unwelcoming, and closed my eyes trying to block out the day's events. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks had passed since my encounter with Ify, and it had faded into the back of my mind like a distant dream. Despite this, I often found myself wondering about the guy, how he was faring without our shared moments in the library. His presence had been a storm, yes, but one that brought a strange sense of peace. I had made sure to steer clear away from Ify's hotspots, a self-imposed exile that kept me from the warmth of his kindness. It was a precaution, a way to maintain the boundaries I had set, but it came with a price. Today, that price was exacted with a vengeance. Tasked with delivering fresh blankets to Ify's block, I had balked at the thought of crossing paths with him again. In a moment of cowardice, I paid someone else to complete the task. But secrets have a way of unraveling in prison, and the guards were none too pleased with my deception. Their punishment was swift. After getting beaten, I was dragged off to solitary confinement. As they hauled me past my cell, my eyes locked with Rudy's for a brief moment. Rudy's eyes said it all. This wouldn't have happened if you were with Ify. 4 hours later. The darkness of the cell was absolute. I had been shivering for what felt like an eternity. For hours might as well have been 4 years in this place. Then a sound shattered the silence. A book hit the ground. My heart leapt to my throat, and for a moment I was certain they had come back for more, but no guards stormed in. Sorry about that. Ify's voice was low. Didn't mean to startle you. He was here? In solitary with me? I struggled to make sense of it. Ify was apologizing for dropping a book? He moved closer, and I could just make out his silhouette against the faint light seeping under the door. They let me read here, he explained, his tone almost casual. It's the only place quiet enough. Before I could respond, he was barking orders at the guard outside, demanding first aid supplies, a towel, and fresh clothes. I was too stunned to protest. Within minutes, Ify was back at my side, his hand surprisingly gentle as he patched up my wounds. As he worked, Ify opened up about his past. He spoke of his brother, a bright young lawyer whose life was destroyed by a bunch of goons. Goons that Ify had gotten in trouble with. He talked about turning himself in, hoping for the death sentence, only to be kept alive as a potential informant or bargaining chip. His voice was devoid of self-pity. I found myself opening up in return, telling Ify about the setup that landed me here. My co-CEO pinned a money laundering scheme on me, I confessed. And the worst part? I always suspected something was off, but I never acted on it. As we talked, a connection formed between us, built on shared regrets and the understanding. I saw Ify once again as a man who had loved and lost, who had made choices he couldn't take back, and in that dark cell, I had to make a decision. Rudy's words played over and over again in my head, yet before I could speak, Ify beat me to it. You're a very peculiar man, Mark, and I've had my eyes on you for a fair while. I guess you can say it was an attraction at first sight. I gulped. I knew where this was going, and this was a golden opportunity for me. As Rudy's words echoed in my mind, I made a calculated decision to lean into Ify for protection. I was tired of being a target, tired of the constant beatings and the fear that consumed me every day. Ify seemed like my best chance at survival in this unforgiving place. Gathering my courage, I turned to Ify, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my chest. You know, Ify, I couldn't stop thinking about you since our encounter in the library, I confessed, carefully blending half-truths. Evie's eyebrows lifted in surprise, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features before he leaned in closer, his gaze intense. "Is that so?" he replied, his tone laced with a bit of curiosity. I nodded, feeling a rush of adrenaline as I took a bold step forward, closing the distance between us. "Yeah," I continued, my voice softening. "I guess you can say you've made quite an impression on me." A smirk tugged at the corner of Evie's lips as he leaned back against the wall, his posture relaxed yet attentive. Well, it seems I've caught the eye of the esteemed Mark," he teased. I felt a surge of confidence as I returned Evie's playful banter, the tension between us palpable in the confined space of the cell. "You could say that," I replied, a smirk of my own playing at my lips. "You're not exactly easy to forget." Our conversation flowed effortlessly from there, each exchange laced with subtle undercurrent of flirtation. I found myself unconsciously drawn to Evie's charisma and wit, my earlier apprehension of flirting with a man melting away. As the hours passed, the boundaries between us blurred, and I found myself leaning closer to Evie, our bodies almost touching as we exchanged confessions and laughter. In that moment, the darkness of the cell seemed to fade away. Eventually, the guard's footsteps echoed outside the cell, signaling the end of our time together. Reluctantly, I pulled away from Evie, my heart heavy with knowledge that this was coming to an end. But, before we parted ways, I mustered all the courage I had left and pressed a gentle kiss to Evie's cheek, my lips lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "Until next time, Evie," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. I might have been laying it on a little thick, but I needed to make my intentions clear. I needed to ingrain myself on Evie's psyche. Evie's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability showing in them as he reached out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Until next time, Mark," he replied. 4 months later. 4 months had passed since that fateful night in the solitary cell, and the dynamics within the prison had inevitably shifted. Evie and I had become an unofficial item, our bond evident to anyone who cared to look. We could be seen together all over the prison, sharing quiet moments and stolen glances amidst the chaos of our surroundings. Things had completely turned around for Rudy and myself, but me especially. The other inmates practically worshipped the ground I walked on now, and the guards wouldn't even meet my eyes. I had become prison royalty thanks to Evie, and he never even had to say a word. Unlike any other person in my position, I never abused the privileges that I now had. I didn't want to rule or be in charge of anything or anyone. Rudy, on the other hand, wasn't as content. He was a man with ambitions. He already held quite the sway prior to Evie's interference, and it only tripled now. Rudy became quite the tyrant in the last 4 months. He even began to put together a small following of loyalists who acted and waited on his whims. He was causing quite the stir in the prison hierarchy, but Evie didn't seem to mind. He never once brought it up while we were together. Speaking of Evie, despite my initial intentions of getting close to him for protection alone, I found myself drawn to the enigmatic criminal in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. I enjoyed our time together. It went beyond a need for physical protection. I found myself I found myself needing to touch and be touched by him. None of it made sense to me. I was a straight man. I always had been. That was all I knew. But every moment I spent with Evie birthed emotions I never thought I could feel for another man. It was frightening and thrilling all at once. I had become hooked, dependent on the rush I felt when we were together because Evie never missed an opportunity to express what and how he felt for me. Meanwhile, unknown to Rudy and myself, Evie's gang members were growing increasingly wary of my presence in their leader's life. They saw me as a potential threat, someone who could disrupt the delicate balance of power within their ranks, just the way Rudy was presently doing to the other gangs thanks to Evie's influence. Concerned for Evie's safety, they decided to take matters into their own hands. Their targets? Rudy and myself. Rudy now found himself at the mercy of Ify's loyal followers. They paid us both a visit in the dead of night. Luckily for me, I remained untouched as they laid into Rudy mercilessly. Rudy, desperate to save himself from further harm, spilled his guts and intentionally threw me under the bus. He told them how I had devised a plan to get into Ify's good graces for protection and power. He painted me the villain in our little story and ensured that their rage was now aimed squarely at me. It worked like a charm. They had already been suspicious of me since the beginning, and now they had tangible proof. With Rudy in tow, they marched us to the yard. This time of the night was Ify's quiet time, and he did not like to be disturbed. Yet, there we were. As we approached, the gates swung open, revealing Ify standing tall and resolute, his gaze unwavering. With a quick glance in my direction, he confirmed I was okay and relaxed a little before turning to the gang member I had fondly labeled as Garlic Breath. "Fred, what's the meaning of this?" Ify asked, without emotions bleeding into his words. One would think he had just asked about the weather. "Treason, boss. These rats have been scheming behind our backs," Fred answered, without missing a beat. Ify turned to face me, his expression unreadable as he awaited an explanation for my betrayal. In that moment, I knew that the fragile bond I had formed with Ify hung in the balance, and I braced myself for the inevitable fallout of my actions, and this was exactly where you found me earlier. Fred spoke up loudly. "Today's the day you die, Mark," he roared as spit met the base of my neck. "What's the matter, Marky? Cat got your tongue?" Rudolph jeered. Not minding the escalating tension, I closed the distance between Ify and myself and kissed him gently, relaying my emotions the best I could. "I love you, Ify." Sadly, my stunt did not fly over well with Fred and the others, and he made sure I knew. I was hit over and over again. Ify turned to face his crew, sadness evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry for being careless. I let my emotions get the best of me and I failed to put you guys first. I promise you I'll make up for it," Ify said, lowering his head into a bow. Ify stood upright and faced the entire crew. "I thank all of you for bringing this to my attention. The situation is dire, but I must impose. No harm should come to him," he said, pointing to my prone form. "If I hadn't pursued him, he would never have gotten close in the first place. The fault lies with me, not Mark." And soon, all of them left. Ify walked towards my still prone form and squatted down to my level. The unreadable look on Ify's face truly broke my heart. I had never seen him like this before, his usually confident demeanor replaced by disappointment. "Look, Ify," I began, my voice trembling slightly as I addressed him directly. "Rudy's not wrong. I wasn't entirely truthful about why I got close to you." Ify's eyes narrowed, his silence urging me to continue. Taking a deep breath, I confessed. "I'm a straight man, or at least I thought I was before I met you. I've never been with another man until now." The confession hung heavy in the air, the tension between us palpable as Ify processed my words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "So what? You've been playing me this whole time?" "No, it's not like that," I protested, desperation creeping into my tone. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen, but being with you, it's made me question everything about myself." Ify's expression softened slightly, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. "And what exactly do you feel for me, Mark?" I hesitated. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "All I know is that you make me feel things that I've never felt before, and I don't want to lose that." He squared up to me, his voice firm, yet tinged with a hint of vulnerability. "You need to stop lying to me, Mark," he warned. "I can't trust someone who's not honest with themselves even." Frustrated by his response, I reached out and grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close until our faces were inches apart again. "I'm not lying to you, Ify," I insisted, my voice trembling with emotion. "I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone, And if that means I have to fight for us, then so be it. Without another word, I closed the distance between us slowly this time, as though I was seeking permission before kissing him, pouring all the longing and uncertainty I felt into that single desperate act. As we broke apart, gasping for air, I searched Ife's eyes for any sign of understanding. "You're lucky I can't help myself when it comes to you," Ife sighed in defeat. "I think I'm in love with you, Mark." My eyes widened at the revelation. "Ife, No, don't say it to me right now. Not right now." Ife placed his hands on my cheek. "I'm a very emotional man, Mark, and I don't believe in second chances." My heart sank at Ife's words. I couldn't imagine a life without him here. "Ife, please." He raised his hand to silence me before continuing. "Let me finish, please." I nodded in defeat. "Like I was saying, I don't believe in second chances, Mark, but it's different with you. I want us to work. I need us to work. I haven't felt this passionate about anyone in a very long time, so Mark, can we please start over? No lies this time," Ife said, holding out a hand to me. Tears streamed down my eyes the moment my hand met his. He pulled me up and into a hug and held me close. "We've got a fair bit of explanation to do when we face Fred and the others," Ife chuckled in my ear. I pulled back a bit and met his emerald green eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes," I whispered back to him. "Lovely. Now let's go. The others are waiting." Ife and I returned to prison together. We had a difficult time getting the rest of Ife's crew to trust our relationship, but over time, they gradually came around. Ife and I enjoyed a love that most people outside of prison never experienced, and when my sentence was over and I was released, I pooled all of my resources and efforts into reducing Ife's sentence and temporarily releasing him on parole. The end. Do you think you could cozy up to a dangerous criminal like Ife if you were in Mark's shoes? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.